I'm Lainey Hale, 35, and I sat frozen in the boardroom of Hale Construction as my brother Derek announced the sale of our family's company to a room full of investors. What they didn't know, what Derek didn't even fully understand, was that I had been secretly running this entire operation for the past 3 years while he gambled away our father's legacy. In that shocking moment, Derek's business partner Marcus stood up and said, "Before we finalize this deal, I think everyone should know who's really been making the decisions that saved this company. Lainey, tell them about the books you've been keeping." The entire room went silent, tension crackling through the air. I realized the secret I'd kept about Derek's gambling addiction and my covert management of the company was about to explode. Before I continue with this story, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. The events I'm about to share changed my entire understanding of family loyalty, communication, and what it means to truly be heard. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family despite being the most capable person in the room, please hit that like button. This family drama took me from the shadows into the spotlight in ways I never expected. And I hope by sharing it, you'll see why sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that's been silent all along. Subscribe if you want more stories about standing up for yourself, even when it means challenging everything your family believes about you. To understand what happened in that boardroom, you need to know about my relationship with Derek and why I had been living in his shadow my entire life. Growing up as the only deaf person in a hearing family wasn't easy. My parents, Margaret and Robert Hale, tried their best, but they never fully embraced my deafness as part of who I was. Instead, they saw it as something to overcome, to work around, to minimize. Derek was born 2 years after me, hearing and charismatic from day one. Where I communicated through sign language and carefully watching facial expressions, Derek commanded attention with his voice and easy smile. My parents learned basic ASL signs, enough to get by, but they never became fluent. Most of our family conversations happened around me rather than with me. Derek became their interpreter, their bridge to understanding their deaf daughter, and somehow in that process, he became the golden child. I wasn't bitter about it, not really. I understood that having a deaf child was challenging for hearing parents. I excelled in school, learned to read lips with remarkable accuracy, and developed a keen ability to observe and understand people in ways that others couldn't. While Derek was the star of every family gathering, charming relatives with his stories and jokes, I was watching, learning, picking up on the subtle dynamics that everyone else missed. When I graduated high school, I was valedictorian. Derek barely scraped by. But at my graduation party, I watched my parents beam with pride as Derek gave a speech about his amazing sister and how proud he was of my accomplishments. He got the applause. I got the achievement. That became our pattern. I studied computer science and business at college, while also becoming a certified ASL interpreter. The combination gave me unique skills in both the technical world and communication. After graduation, I started my own small tech consulting business, helping companies improve their digital infrastructure while also providing interpretation services for deaf employees and clients. Derek, meanwhile, drifted through various jobs and interests. He had natural charisma but struggled with follow-through. He tried sales, attempted to start several businesses that failed within months, and generally coasted on charm and our family name. My parents worried about him constantly, always looking for ways to help him find his path. When our father Robert was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at age 58, everything changed. Dad had built Hale Construction from nothing, starting as a single contractor and growing it into one of the region's most respected construction companies. He specialized in commercial buildings and had earned a reputation for quality work and fair treatment of employees. The company employed nearly 200 people, including a significant number of deaf workers whom Dad had started hiring after I entered the field of ASL interpretation. As Dad's condition worsened, it became clear that someone needed to take over the business. The obvious choice, in everyone's mind, was Derek. He was the hearing son, the one who could communicate effectively with clients and employees. Never mind that his longest employment had lasted 8 months, or that he had no experience in construction or business management. He was personable, he was hearing, and he was male. In my family's traditional mindset, that made him the heir apparent. I watched this transition happen with a mixture of resignation and growing concern. Derek threw himself into the role with enthusiasm, learning the basics of construction management and surrounding himself with Dad's longtime foremen and project managers. For the first year, things seemed to go relatively well. Derek's natural charm worked with clients, and he had good people handling the technical aspects of the business. What I didn't realize was that Derek had also developed a serious gambling problem. It started small, online poker games and weekend trips to the casino. But as the stress of running a company he wasn't prepared for mounted, his gambling escalated. He began using company funds to cover his debts, telling himself he would pay it back when he hit a big win. I discovered the problem accidentally. I was providing interpretation services for a meeting between Derek and the company's deaf employees about safety protocols. After the meeting, I was helping to review some paperwork when I noticed discrepancies in the financial records. Numbers that didn't add up, transfers that seemed unusual, checks written to unfamiliar vendors. Being naturally detail-oriented and having a background in business, I couldn't let it go. Over the following weeks, I quietly investigated further. What I found was devastating. Derek had been systematically draining the company's accounts to fund his gambling habit. He had borrowed against company assets, delayed payments to suppliers, and was on the verge of defaulting on several major contracts. Confronting Derek was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I found him in Dad's old office one evening, staring at a pile of bills and looking defeated. "We need to talk," I signed, making sure he was looking at me. "I can't deal with this right now, Lainey," he said, not bothering to sign back. This was typical. He would speak while I signed, creating an imbalanced conversation that always left me feeling like I was doing more work to communicate. "The company is in trouble," I signed clearly. "I've seen the books." Derek's face went white. "You've been snooping around." "I've been trying to help," I replied. "And what I found scares me." "Derek, you're going to lose everything Dad built." What followed was a heated argument where Derek initially denied everything, then minimized the problem, and finally broke down and admitted the extent of his gambling losses. He owed over $300,000 to various creditors and gambling sites. The company was weeks away from bankruptcy. "I can fix this," he insisted. "I just need some time, maybe a loan to cover the immediate debts." "Derek," I signed, "you need help. Real help. This isn't something you can gamble your way out of." But Derek wasn't ready to hear that. Instead, he begged me not to tell our parents or anyone else about the situation. He promised he would handle it, find a way to make things right. And like I had done my entire life, I agreed to protect him. What I didn't tell Derek was that I had already started formulating a plan to save the company. My tech consulting business had been successful, and I had savings I could use as a stopgap measure. More importantly, I had been observing the construction business for years and had ideas about how to modernize operations, improve efficiency, and expand into new markets. Over the next several months, I began what could only be described as a covert operation. Using my access to company systems as an interpreter and Derek's general distraction with his gambling problem, I started making strategic changes to save Hale Construction. First, I addressed the immediate financial crisis. I quietly transferred money from my own accounts to cover the most pressing debts, making it look like the payments came from company revenue. I renegotiated payment terms with suppliers, using my business background to secure better deals than Derek had managed. I also implemented new financial controls and monitoring systems to prevent further unauthorized withdrawals. Next, I tackled operational improvements. The deaf employees at Hale Construction had always been some of our most skilled and dedicated workers, but they were often underutilized because of communication barriers. I began working more closely with them, serving as both interpreter and strategic advisor. Through our conversations, I learned about inefficiencies in project management, waste in material ordering, and opportunities for process improvements. Working with the deaf crew became my secret advantage. We could communicate freely in ASL while hearing employees and management remained unaware of our discussions. The deaf workers became my eyes and ears throughout the company, reporting problems and suggesting solutions that I could implement through careful manipulation of Derek's decisions. I developed sophisticated systems for managing the company from the shadows. I created email accounts that appeared to be Derek's, handling client communications with a level of professionalism and attention to detail that Derek had never shown. I prepared reports and proposals that Derek would present in meetings, coaching him beforehand on the key points. I even forged his signature on important contracts and documents, becoming an expert at replicating his handwriting. The most challenging aspect was managing client relationships. Derek's charm could get us in the door, but his lack of technical knowledge and follow-through often created problems. I began attending meetings as their interpreter, but I was really there to provide real-time guidance to Derek through subtle cues and quick sign language suggestions that clients couldn't understand. Gradually, Hale Construction began to turn around. We started completing projects on time and under budget. Client satisfaction improved dramatically. We won several major contracts that I had identified and pursued through careful research and relationship building. The company's reputation grew, and our workforce expanded. Through it all, Derek took complete credit for the turnaround. He basked in praise from clients, employees, and our parents. He gave interviews to local business publications about his leadership philosophy and the innovative approaches he was bringing to the construction industry. Meanwhile, I remained invisible, just the deaf sister who helped with interpretation services. The irony wasn't lost on me. My deafness, which my family had always seen as a limitation, had become my greatest asset. People underestimated me, ignored me in meetings, spoke freely around me assuming I couldn't understand or wasn't important enough to worry about. I learned more about our competitors, potential clients, and industry trends than Derek ever could, simply because no one thought to guard their conversations around the quiet woman in the corner. My parents were thrilled with Derek's transformation. They praised his business acumen, his leadership skills, his ability to honor Dad's legacy while modernizing the company. Family dinners became celebrations of Derek's success, with detailed discussions of contracts won and projects completed, work that I had largely orchestrated from behind the scenes. The emotional toll of this arrangement was significant. I was working essentially 2 full-time jobs, maintaining my tech consulting business and secretly managing Hale Construction. I had no social life, no romantic relationships, no time for the hobbies and interests that had once brought me joy. Worse, I was living with the constant stress of maintaining an elaborate deception, always worried that one slip-up would expose everything. But I told myself it was temporary. Derek would eventually get his gambling under control, learn the business properly, and be able to take over legitimately. I was just providing a bridge, helping him through a difficult period. Our parents would never have to know how close we had come to losing everything Dad had built. What I didn't anticipate was how addictive the success would become for Derek. As the company thrived under my covert management, his confidence grew. He began to believe his own narrative about being a visionary leader. Rather than focusing on learning the actual skills needed to run the business, he became more focused on the public recognition and social status that came with being a successful CEO. Derek's gambling, meanwhile, continued despite his promises to quit. The success of the company gave him access to more credit and larger lines of borrowing. Instead of being satisfied with stabilizing his debts, he began taking bigger risks, convinced that his next big win would solve all his problems permanently. I discovered the extent of his continued gambling during a routine review of company finances. Despite all my efforts to save Hale Construction, Derek had been quietly borrowing against the company's improved credit rating to fund his addiction. We were back where we started, teetering on the edge of financial ruin. This time, I confronted Derek more forcefully. I demanded that he enter treatment for his gambling addiction and consider stepping back from day-to-day operations while he got help. Derek's response was explosive. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he said, pacing around the office. "Everyone expects me to be Dad, to have all the answers. Do you know what it's like to pretend you know what you're doing when you're in over your head?" "Yes," I signed emphatically. "I do know what that's like. I've been doing it for 3 years. Derek stopped pacing and stared at me. For a moment, I thought he might finally acknowledge what I had been doing, the sacrifices I had made to protect him and the company. Instead, he shook his head. "It's not the same thing, Lainey. You're behind the scenes. I'm the one everyone looks to, the one who has to make the final decisions and live with the consequences. The dismissal stung more than I expected. After everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed, Derek still saw my contributions as secondary, as support work rather than leadership. It was around this time that Marcus Chen entered the picture. Marcus was a successful business consultant and former construction industry executive who had been approached by a large development company looking to acquire smaller, well-run construction firms. Hale Construction had caught their attention because of our recent success and sterling reputation. Marcus began conducting due diligence on our company, meeting with Derek and key employees to understand our operations and culture. I was present at many of these meetings as an interpreter, but I quickly realized that Marcus was more observant than most people. He noticed inconsistencies between Derek's explanations and the actual evidence of how the company operated. He asked detailed questions that Derek struggled to answer convincingly. During one particularly challenging meeting, Derek was trying to explain our project management software and workflow systems. These were systems I had designed and implemented, and Derek's superficial understanding was obvious to anyone with real business experience. After the meeting, Marcus approached me privately. "I'd like to speak with you about the company's interpretation services," he said carefully. "Perhaps we could grab coffee sometime?" I agreed, curious about what he wanted to discuss. When we met the following day, Marcus was direct in a way that surprised me. "I think you know more about Hale Construction's operations than your brother realizes," he said, maintaining eye contact in a way that few hearing people did when speaking with me. "I'd like to hear your perspective on the company." It was the first time in years that someone had asked for my opinion about the business rather than just my interpretation services. Marcus had done his research and learned enough ASL to conduct basic conversations without requiring interpretation. The gesture meant more to me than he probably realized. Over the course of several conversations, Marcus pieced together the reality of how Hale Construction operated. He was astute enough to recognize the signs of my covert management without requiring me to explicitly confess to anything initially. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions about processes, systems, and decision-making that gradually revealed the truth. "The deaf workers speak very highly of you," he mentioned during one of our coffee meetings. "They seem to see you as more than just an interpreter." "They're good people," I signed. "Very skilled, very dedicated. Sometimes they share ideas with me about improving operations." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Ideas that somehow make their way into implementation?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Marcus seemed trustworthy, but acknowledging my role in running the company would mean admitting to fraud, forgery, and a host of other potentially illegal activities. "I care about the company," I finally signed. "I want it to succeed." "I can see that," Marcus replied. "And I can see that it has succeeded, quite remarkably. The question is whether that success is sustainable under the current arrangement." As Marcus's investigation continued, I realized that the sale of the company might actually be the best outcome for everyone. Derek would get enough money to pay off his gambling debts and hopefully get his life back on track. The employees would have job security under new ownership. And I could finally step out of the shadows, either by staying with the new company in an official capacity or by moving on to pursue other opportunities. What I didn't expect was for Derek to panic as the sale negotiations progressed. Despite his gambling problems and lack of business acumen, he had become attached to the status and recognition that came with being CEO of a successful company. The prospect of losing that identity terrified him more than the financial problems he had created. 3 weeks before the planned sale announcement, Derek came to my apartment late one evening, clearly agitated. "I need your help," he said when I opened the door. "I need you to tell Marcus that the sale is a bad idea, that the company isn't ready for new ownership." "Why would I do that?" I signed. "The sale will solve your debt problems and secure everyone's jobs." "But I'll lose everything," Derek replied. "This company is all I have, all I am. Without it, I'm nothing." I stared at my brother, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. Derek hadn't learned anything from the past 3 years. He still saw the company as something that belonged to him by right rather than something he had nearly destroyed through his actions. He still had no real understanding of the work I had done to save it. "Derek," I signed carefully, "you're not running this company. You haven't been for years. The sale is the right thing to do." His reaction was explosive. "How dare you say that? I've worked my ass off to turn this place around. I've made the tough decisions, built the relationships, closed the deals. You just translate." "I do a lot more than translate," I signed, my own anger rising. "I've been running this company while you've been gambling away everything Dad built." Derek's face contorted with rage. "You're delusional, Lainey. You're just jealous that I'm successful and you're not. You're trying to sabotage me because you can't stand that everyone respects me and sees you as just the deaf girl who helps out." The words hit me like physical blows, not because they were true, but because they revealed how little Derek understood or appreciated everything I had sacrificed for him. In that moment, I realized that I was done protecting him from the consequences of his choices. "Get out," I signed. "Don't come back until you're ready to face reality." Derek left, slamming the door behind him. I stood in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the financial records, business plans, and documents that told the real story of Hale Construction's success. For the first time in 3 years, I allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to step into the light, to claim credit for the work I had done, to be seen and acknowledged for my contributions. The confrontation at the sale announcement meeting happened exactly 2 weeks later. Derek had scheduled the meeting to officially announce the sale to employees, clients, and key stakeholders. It was meant to be a celebration of his successful stewardship of the company and a smooth transition to new ownership. I arrived at the meeting expecting to serve in my usual role as interpreter. The conference room at our main office was packed with people, employees, clients, local business leaders, and representatives from the acquiring company. Derek stood at the front of the room, looking confident and polished in his best suit. "Thank you all for being here today," Derek began. "As you know, Hale Construction has experienced tremendous growth and success over the past several years. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together, and I'm excited to announce that we've reached an agreement to sell the company to Meridian Development Group, ensuring continued growth and job security for all our employees." There was polite applause. Derek continued with his prepared remarks about the company's achievements, his vision for the future, and his gratitude to everyone who had supported his leadership. I interpreted his words for the deaf employees in attendance, but my mind was elsewhere, thinking about all the late nights I had spent saving this company, all the problems I had solved, all the innovations I had implemented. That's when Marcus stood up from his seat near the back of the room. "Before we finalize this transaction," he said clearly, his voice cutting through Derek's presentation, "I think there are some things about this company's operations that everyone should understand. Lainey, perhaps you could share with everyone how the financial turnaround was actually accomplished." The room went completely silent. Every eye turned to me, sitting in my usual spot near the front with my hands poised to interpret. Derek's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "I don't know what you're insinuating," Derek said, his voice tight with panic. "But Lainey provides interpretation services. She's not involved in business operations." Marcus walked to the front of the room, carrying a thick folder of documents. "Actually, I think she's been very involved in business operations. Lainey, would you like to tell everyone about the financial systems you designed, the client relationships you've managed, and the strategic decisions you've been making for the past 3 years?" The weight of the moment settled over me like a physical presence. Every person in that room was watching, waiting for my response. The deaf employees were signing questions to each other, clearly aware that something significant was happening. My parents, who had come to celebrate Derek's success, looked confused and concerned. For 3 years, I had operated in the shadows, protecting Derek, maintaining family harmony, avoiding confrontation. But sitting there in that packed conference room, I realized that my silence had enabled more than Derek's gambling addiction. It had enabled a system where my contributions were invisible, where my capabilities were dismissed, where my voice literally did not matter. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning system humming in the background. "It's true," I signed, making sure everyone could see me clearly. I spoke aloud as I signed, something I rarely did in professional settings, wanting to ensure that both deaf and hearing people in the room could understand me directly rather than through interpretation. For the past 3 years, I have been managing the day-to-day operations of Hale Construction. I implemented the financial systems that turned this company around. I designed the project management workflows that improved our efficiency. I built the client relationships that brought in our major contracts. I hired and trained the employees who made our success possible. Derek tried to interrupt, but Marcus held up a hand to stop him. "Let her finish," he said firmly. I continued, my confidence growing with each word. Derek has been struggling with a gambling addiction that nearly bankrupted the company. I discovered the problem 3 years ago and began taking steps to save the business while he got help. I used my own money to cover debts, renegotiated contracts with suppliers, and essentially ran the entire operation while Derek maintained the public face of leadership. The reaction in the room was immediate and intense. Some people looked shocked, others skeptical, still others seemed to be putting pieces together in their minds. The deaf employees began signing excitedly among themselves, and I caught fragments of their conversation. "We knew it, finally, she saved us all." Derek found his voice. "This is ridiculous," he said, his charming smile looking forced and desperate. "Lainey is having some kind of breakdown. She's always been jealous of my success, and now she's trying to sabotage this deal with these crazy accusations." But Marcus was prepared for this response. He opened his folder and began pulling out documents. "Actually, I've been investigating the company's operations for several months as part of our acquisition due diligence. What I found was a clear pattern of Lainey's involvement in every major decision and innovation over the past 3 years." He held up a stack of papers. "These are email communications from accounts registered under Derek's name, but the writing style, technical knowledge, and strategic thinking are consistent with someone with Lainey's background and expertise. I had a forensic analyst examine them." Marcus pulled out more documents. "These are financial records showing transfers from Lainey's personal accounts to cover company debts, payments that kept Hale Construction solvent during critical periods." He continued presenting evidence, witness statements from deaf employees who had observed Lainey's management activities, client testimonials praising innovative solutions that Derek couldn't explain in detail, and technical documentation for systems that exceeded Derek's demonstrated capabilities. As Marcus methodically laid out the case, I watched Derek's facade crumble. His confident smile faded, his shoulders sagged, and his face took on a grayish pallor. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. "This is all taken out of context," Derek said weakly. "Yes, Lainey has been helpful, but I'm the one making the final decisions. I'm the CEO." One of the deaf employees, a skilled carpenter named Roberto who had worked for my father for over a decade, stood up and began signing. I interpreted his words for the room. "Roberto says that for 3 years, Lainey has been the one solving problems on job sites, approving changes to project plans, and making decisions about worker safety and efficiency. He says all the deaf workers know she's been running the company, and they've been waiting for someone to finally acknowledge it." Other deaf employees nodded vigorously, and several hearing employees began speaking up as well. A foreman named Jim raised his hand. "I've been wondering how Derek suddenly got so smart about construction techniques and project management. Makes sense now that I know Lainey was behind it. She knows this business better than anyone." The momentum was building, and I could see Derek becoming increasingly desperate. He turned to our parents, who were sitting in stunned silence. "Mom, Dad, you can't believe this," he pleaded. "Tell them that I've been running the company. Tell them about all the success we've had, all the progress I've made." My mother looked between Derek and me, confusion and dawning realization warring on her face. My father, whose Alzheimer's had progressed significantly, seemed lost in the commotion. "Derek," my mother said slowly, "is this true? Has she been helping more than we knew?" "She's been helping," Derek admitted, grasping for a way to minimize the revelation. "But helping isn't the same as running the company. I'm still the one in charge." That's when Marcus delivered his final piece of evidence. "Actually, Derek, according to the forensic accounting we conducted, You've withdrawn over $400,000 from company accounts over the past 18 months for what appear to be gambling-related expenses. Without Laney's intervention, Hale Construction would have been bankrupt 6 months ago. The room erupted. Employees began talking loudly among themselves, clients looked angry and concerned, and my mother gasped audibly. Derek's face went from grey to bright red. "That's private information," he said, his voice cracking. "You had no right to investigate my personal finances." "I had every right," Marcus replied calmly, "as part of our due diligence for the acquisition. And what I found was that this company's success story isn't about Derek Hale's leadership. It's about Laney Hale's dedication, intelligence, and sacrifice." Marcus turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been in business for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what Laney has accomplished. She single-handedly saved this company while receiving none of the credit and taking all of the personal risk. She deserves not just recognition, but leadership of the organization she's been running all along." The applause that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It started with the deaf employees, their hands moving in the visual applause of sign language, then spread to the hearing employees and clients. For the first time in my life, I was the center of attention for my accomplishments rather than my disability. Derek stood frozen at the front of the room, his prepared presentation forgotten, his carefully constructed image shattered. I felt a moment of sympathy for him, remembering the little boy who had interpreted for me at family dinners, who had sometimes stood up for me when other kids made fun of my deafness. But that sympathy was tempered by the memory of all the times he had dismissed my contributions, taken credit for my work, and allowed others to see me as just the deaf girl who helped out. He had had 3 years to acknowledge what I was doing, to share credit, to treat me as a partner rather than a silent assistant. Instead, he had chosen to maintain the fiction that he was the visionary leader while I was merely support staff. As the applause died down, Marcus addressed the room again. "Given these revelations, Meridian Development Group would like to propose a modification to our acquisition offer. We're no longer interested in buying Hale Construction as it currently exists. Instead, we'd like to offer Laney Hale a partnership opportunity, recognizing her as the true leader of this organization and giving her the authority she's already been exercising unofficially." I stood there, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. In the space of an hour, my entire life had changed. The secret I had guarded so carefully was now public knowledge. The family dynamics I had spent decades navigating were permanently altered. And the career I had built in the shadows was suddenly, blindingly, in the spotlight. Derek finally found his voice again. "You can't do this," he said, his tone shifting from defensive to angry. "This company belongs to my family. My father built it, and I inherited it. Laney is just an employee." "Actually," Marcus said, pulling out one more document, "according to the corporate filings I've reviewed, Laney has been listed as a co-owner and officer of the company for the past 2 years. Her signature appears on all the major contracts and financial documents that have driven the company's success." I had forgotten about that detail. When I had been forced to forge Derek's signature on important documents, I had eventually decided it was safer and more legally defensible to add my own name to the corporate structure. I had done it quietly, filing the paperwork without fanfare, thinking of it as protection against potential legal issues rather than as a claim to leadership. Derek stared at me with a look of betrayal that cut deep despite everything that had happened. "You've been planning this all along," he accused. "You've been undermining me, stealing my company. I saved your company," I signed and spoke clearly. "I saved your reputation, your employees' jobs, and your clients' projects. I did it because you're my brother and I love you, but I can't protect you from the consequences of your choices anymore." My mother stood up, tears streaming down her face. "Laney, is this all true? Have you really been running the company?" I looked at my mother, this woman who had struggled to connect with me my entire life, who had never learned to sign fluently, who had always seen Derek as the capable child and me as the one who needed accommodation. "Yes, Mom," I signed and spoke. "It's all true. I've been running Hale Construction for 3 years while Derek struggled with gambling addiction. I did it to save Dad's legacy and to protect Derek from consequences that might have destroyed him. But I can't stay invisible anymore." My mother walked over to me, her face a mixture of pride, guilt, and confusion. She reached out and took my hands, looking directly into my eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said, attempting to sign as she spoke. Her signs were clumsy and incomplete, but the effort meant everything to me. "I'm sorry we didn't see what you were doing. I'm sorry we didn't appreciate how capable you are. I'm sorry we failed you." The apology I had waited my entire life to hear was finally being offered, but it felt bittersweet in the context of everything that had been lost and damaged to get to this point. Derek was gathering his papers and preparing to leave when one of the clients, a developer named Sarah Chen who had become one of our biggest accounts, stood up to address him. "Derek, I want you to know that every successful project we've completed together, every innovative solution that impressed me, every time I praised your company's professionalism, that was all Lainey's work, wasn't it?" Derek couldn't meet her eyes. "It was a team effort," he mumbled. "No," Sarah said firmly. "It was Lainey's effort. And you let me and everyone else believe it was yours. That's not just dishonest, it's cruel to someone who clearly cared enough about you and this company to sacrifice her own recognition for your benefit." Other clients and employees began speaking up, sharing their own observations and experiences that suddenly made sense in light of the revelations. The picture that emerged was of Derek as a charming figurehead and Lainey as the competent professional actually running the operation. Derek finally had enough. "This is all very touching," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm and hurt, "but you're all forgetting something important. Lainey committed fraud. She forged my signature on legal documents. She transferred company funds without authorization. She may have saved the company, but she broke the law doing it." The room went quiet again as people absorbed this accusation. Derek was right, technically speaking. In my efforts to save Hale Construction, I had engaged in activities that could be considered criminal fraud. The forgeries alone were serious offenses, regardless of my motivations. Marcus stepped forward. "That's true, Derek. Lainey did take significant legal risks to save this company. But the question is whether you want to press charges against someone who sacrificed her own financial security and legal safety to protect you and your employees." Derek hesitated, and I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. Part of him was angry enough to want revenge, to see me face consequences for overshadowing him. But another part of him knew that pursuing legal action would expose his own gambling addiction and financial mismanagement in ways that could destroy what remained of his reputation. "I don't want to press charges," he said finally. "But I also can't stay here and watch everyone celebrate Lainey for stealing my company. No one stole anything from you, Derek," I signed. "I saved something you were destroying. There's a difference." Derek looked around the room one more time, seeing the faces of employees and clients who now viewed him not as a successful leader but as someone who had taken credit for work he hadn't done. The humiliation was clearly unbearable. "I'm done," he announced. "I'm out. Lainey can have the company and all the headaches that come with it. I hope she's happy." He walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back to me. For a moment, I thought he might apologize, or acknowledge what I had sacrificed for him, or show some recognition of the impossible position he had put me in. Instead, he said, "You think you've won something, but you haven't. This company was never really yours, no matter what paperwork you filed. Dad built it for his son, not his deaf daughter. You'll never be able to change that." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were true, but because they revealed how little Derek understood about what I had been fighting for. This was never about claiming ownership or proving myself superior to him. It was about saving something our father had built, protecting the jobs of people who depended on the company, and finally being seen for who I really was rather than who my family assumed I was. Derek left without another word, and the room remained silent for several long moments. I stood there, emotionally drained, watching the door close behind my brother and wondering if our relationship could ever be repaired. Marcus cleared his throat gently. "I think we should give everyone time to process what's happened here today. Lainey, if you're willing, I'd like to discuss the partnership opportunity in more detail tomorrow." I nodded, still overwhelmed by everything that had transpired. As people began filing out of the conference room, many stopped to speak with me directly. Some offered congratulations, others asked questions about the future of the company, and several simply wanted to express their appreciation for what I had done. Roberto, the deaf carpenter who had spoken up earlier, approached me with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he signed. "You saved all our jobs, but more than that, you showed everyone that deaf people can lead, can make important decisions, can run successful businesses. My daughter is deaf too, and now I can tell her that anything is possible." His words meant more to me than all the business accolades combined. Throughout this entire ordeal, I had been focused on saving the company and protecting Derek. I hadn't fully considered the broader implications of my story for the deaf community, for other women in male-dominated industries, for anyone who had ever been underestimated because of who they were rather than what they could accomplish. As the room emptied, my parents remained in their seats, looking shell-shocked and uncertain. I approached them slowly, unsure what to expect. "Lainey," my mother began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with how to process everything she had learned. "I know this is a lot," I signed and spoke. "I never wanted it to come out this way." My father, despite his Alzheimer's progression, seemed to have moments of clarity. "You saved the company," he said, his voice weak but certain. "You did what I taught Derek to do, but better." It was perhaps the first time in my life that my father had directly compared Derek and me in my favor. The validation was bittersweet, coming so late and in such difficult circumstances. "Dad always said that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room," I continued. "Sometimes it's about being the person who does what needs to be done, even when no one is watching." My mother reached for my hands again. "We need to learn," she said, attempting to sign along with her words. "We need to really learn to communicate with you, to see you for who you are instead of who we thought you should be." "It's not too late," I assured her. "But it will require effort from all of us." That evening, I returned to my apartment feeling emotionally and physically exhausted. The adrenaline of the confrontation had worn off, leaving me to contemplate the magnitude of how my life had changed in a single day. I was no longer Derek's silent partner, no longer the invisible family member who worked behind the scenes. I was now the public face of a successful construction company, with all the opportunities and responsibilities that entailed. But I was also alone in a way I hadn't been before. Derek's parting words had made it clear that he saw my actions as a betrayal rather than a sacrifice. Our relationship, already strained by years of enabling and resentment, might be irreparably damaged. The next morning, I met with Marcus to discuss the partnership opportunity. He outlined Meridian's vision for expanding Hale Construction while maintaining its core values and culture. "We're not interested in just acquiring another construction company," Marcus explained. "We're interested in partnering with an innovative leader who has demonstrated exceptional capability under extraordinary circumstances. What you've accomplished over the past 3 years is remarkable not just in terms of business results, but in terms of leadership under pressure." "I appreciate that," I replied. "But I need to be honest about my limitations. I've been operating in the shadows for so long that I'm not sure how effective I'll be as a public-facing CEO." Marcus smiled. "Lainey, you've been managing client relationships, leading employees, and making strategic decisions for 3 years. The only difference now is that people will know it's you doing those things instead of giving Derek credit for your work." He was right, of course. The skills I had developed in secret were the same skills I would need as an official leader. The main difference would be the confidence to own my accomplishments rather than hide them. Over the following weeks, we worked out the details of the partnership. Hale Construction would become a subsidiary of Meridian, with me as CEO and a significant ownership stake. The deaf employees would receive additional training and advancement opportunities, and we would expand our commitment to inclusive hiring practices. Derek, meanwhile, seemed to disappear entirely. He cleaned out his office one night when no one was around, leaving no forwarding address or contact information. My parents were devastated by his departure and worried about his mental health and safety. I struggled with guilt about Derek's situation. Despite everything that had happened, despite his gambling addiction and his willingness to take credit for my work, he was still my brother. I had never wanted to destroy his life or drive him away from the family. Marcus helped me work through these feelings during one of our planning meetings. "You're not responsible for Derek's choices," he pointed out. You spent 3 years trying to protect him from the consequences of his gambling addiction. At some point, he has to take responsibility for his own life. I know that intellectually, I admitted. But emotionally, it's hard not to feel like I could have handled things differently. How? Marcus challenged gently. You tried talking to him privately. You covered his debts with your own money. You ran his company for him while he continued gambling. What else could you have done? I didn't have an answer for that question. I had exhausted every option short of enabling Derek indefinitely, which would have eventually destroyed both the company and my own life. 3 months after the confrontation, I received an unexpected letter from Derek. It was postmarked from Nevada, where he was apparently attending a residential gambling addiction treatment program. Lainey, the letter began, I know I said some terrible things the day everything came out, and I know I've been avoiding the family since then. I needed time to process what happened and to face some hard truths about myself. You were right about everything. I did have a gambling problem. I was destroying the company Dad built. And you did save it, at great personal cost to yourself. I've been angry and resentful because it's easier than admitting that my little sister is smarter, more capable, and more dedicated than I ever was. I'm in treatment now, really committed this time. I'm starting to understand that my gambling wasn't just about the money or the thrill. It was about feeling inadequate, feeling like I could never live up to expectations or be the person everyone needed me to be. Instead of dealing with those feelings, I escaped into gambling and let you carry the weight of my responsibilities. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I said some cruel things about Dad building the company for his son, not his deaf daughter. That was wrong and hurtful, and I said it because I was lashing out. The truth is that Dad would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. You embodied everything he taught us about integrity, hard work, and taking care of the people who depend on you. I hope someday we can rebuild our relationship, but I understand if you need time. I also hope you know that despite all my resentment and stupid behavior, I've always been proud to have you as my sister. I just wasn't mature enough to say so before. Take care of yourself and the company. Both are in better hands with you than they ever were with me. The letter was signed simply Derek, but it represented more emotional honesty than my brother had ever shown before. I cried as I read it, feeling a mixture of relief, hope, and lingering sadness for all the years we had lost to misunderstanding and poor communication. I shared the letter with my parents, who were relieved to know Derek was safe and getting help. My mother, true to her word, had been taking intensive ASL classes and could now hold basic conversations with me in sign language. My father's condition had stabilized somewhat, and he seemed to take pride in my success even as his other memories faded. The transformation of Hale Construction under official leadership exceeded even my optimistic projections. Free from the need to hide my involvement, I was able to implement more ambitious innovations and strategic initiatives. We expanded into sustainable building practices, developed partnerships with deaf and hard of hearing trade schools, and became a model for inclusive workplace practices in the construction industry. The deaf employees, no longer relegated to support roles, took on leadership positions throughout the company. Roberto was promoted to project manager, and several others moved into supervisory and training roles. The change in morale was palpable. People who had felt overlooked and undervalued suddenly found themselves at the center of our success story. Marcus and I developed both a strong business partnership and a close personal relationship. He had learned ASL fluently and became one of the few hearing people in my life who communicated with me as an equal rather than someone who needed accommodation. "You know what I admire most about you," he said one evening as we reviewed quarterly reports. "You never let anyone convince you that being deaf was a limitation. Instead, you turned it into an advantage." It took me a long time to see it that way, I admitted. For most of my life, I thought my deafness was something I had to overcome or work around. It wasn't until I started managing the company that I realized how much I could observe and understand precisely because people underestimated me. "And now you're using that perspective to build something bigger than just a successful business," Marcus observed. "You're changing how people think about disability, about leadership, about what's possible when we look past our assumptions." He was right. The story of Hale Construction's transformation had attracted media attention and speaking opportunities. I found myself becoming an advocate for deaf rights and inclusive business practices, roles I had never sought but felt called to embrace. 1 year after the boardroom confrontation, we held an anniversary celebration for employees, clients, and community partners. The event was fully accessible, with ASL interpreters, captioning, and other accommodations that made it welcoming to both deaf and hearing participants. As I stood before the crowd, preparing to give remarks about our success and future plans, I thought about how far I had traveled from that silent corner where I had spent so many years. The journey had been painful and complicated, involving loss and betrayal as well as growth and recognition. But standing there, surrounded by employees who valued my leadership, clients who respected my expertise, and family members who finally saw me for who I truly was, I felt a sense of wholeness I had never experienced before. 1 year ago, I began signing and speaking to the diverse audience. I was invisible in my own family's business. Today, I want to talk about what it means to step out of the shadows and claim your own voice. For too long, I allowed others to define my capabilities based on their assumptions about my deafness. I thought that being accommodating, being helpful, being invisible was the price I had to pay for acceptance. What I learned is that true acceptance requires authenticity. It requires showing up as your whole self and demanding to be seen for who you really are. This company's success isn't just about financial growth or operational efficiency. It's about creating a workplace where everyone's contributions are valued, where different perspectives are seen as assets, and where leadership can emerge from unexpected places. Many of you know that I spent 3 years running this company from behind the scenes while my brother received credit for decisions I was making. I don't share this story to diminish Derek or to claim victim status. I share it because I know there are others in this room, in this community, in workplaces everywhere, who feel invisible despite their contributions. To those people, I want to say, your voice matters. Your perspective is valuable. Your leadership is needed. Don't wait for permission to step forward. Don't wait for someone else to recognize your worth. The world needs what you have to offer, but first, you have to believe it yourself. The deaf community has a concept called deaf gain, the idea that deafness isn't a deficit to be overcome, but a difference that brings unique strengths and perspectives. I've learned that this principle applies beyond disability. Whatever makes you different, whatever others see as a limitation, can become your greatest asset if you refuse to accept other people's narrow definitions of your potential. Hale Construction's future is bright not because we've overcome the challenges of inclusive leadership, but because we've embraced them. We're building more than structures, we're building a culture where authentic communication, diverse perspectives, and collaborative leadership create success that benefits everyone. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Thank you for seeing possibilities where others saw limitations. And thank you for proving that the strongest foundations are built on truth, authenticity, and the courage to stand in your own power. The applause that followed was overwhelming, hands clapping, voices cheering, and the beautiful visual applause of dozens of deaf community members whose hands danced in celebration. But the most meaningful moment came when I spotted my parents in the crowd, both of them signing "We love you" with tears streaming down their faces. 6 months later, I received another letter from Derek. This one was different, more mature, more thoughtful, and accompanied by a small gift. "Lainey," he wrote, "I've been sober from gambling for 14 months now, and I'm working as a counselor at the treatment center where I got help. It's humbling work, and it's taught me a lot about taking responsibility for my actions. I've been following the company's success in the business journals, and I'm genuinely proud of what you've accomplished. More than that, I'm proud to tell people that the brilliant CEO of Hale Construction is my sister. I enclosed something I found while going through Dad's papers that Mom sent me. I thought you should have it." Inside the envelope was a handwritten note in my father's careful script, dated just weeks before his Alzheimer's diagnosis. It read, "Note to self, need to talk to Lainey about taking a bigger role in the company. She has better business sense than Derek and understands the construction industry better than either of us realized. Her work with the deaf employees has been invaluable, but I think she could contribute so much more if we gave her the opportunity. Derek is charismatic, But Lainey has the substance to really build something lasting. Need to find a way to have this conversation without making Derek feel displaced. Reading my father's words, I realized that he had seen my potential long before I had been forced to demonstrate it in crisis. The tragedy was that his illness had prevented him from having that conversation, from creating a path forward that might have spared our family years of misunderstanding and conflict. But perhaps everything had happened the way it needed to happen. Perhaps I had needed to prove to myself that I could lead, could make difficult decisions, could stand up for what I believed in. Perhaps Derek had needed to face the consequences of his addiction and learn to value authenticity over image. Perhaps our parents had needed to see their assumptions challenged and their communication barriers exposed. Today, Hale Construction employs over 400 people across 3 states. We're recognized as an industry leader in inclusive hiring practices and sustainable building techniques. The deaf employees who once worked in the shadows now hold leadership positions throughout the organization. And I serve on several boards focused on disability rights and inclusive business practices. Derek and I speak regularly now, though he remains in Nevada working in addiction counseling. Our relationship is different than it was, more honest, more equal, built on mutual respect rather than protective enabling. He's talked about wanting to visit sometime, to see the company and meet the new employees, to apologize in person to the people who worked with him during his gambling years. My parents visit the company frequently, and my mother has become something of an ASL evangelist, encouraging other parents of deaf children to embrace their children's language and culture rather than seeing deafness as something to overcome. Marcus and I were married last year in a ceremony that was fully bilingual, conducted in both spoken English and ASL. He jokes that marrying me was the best business decision he ever made, though I remind him that I'm the one who should get credit for that particular strategic partnership. But perhaps the most meaningful change has been internal. I no longer feel the need to make myself small to make others comfortable. I no longer hide my capabilities or apologize for taking up space. I've learned that true leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, it's about creating space for all voices to be heard, respected, and valued. The construction industry will always be challenging, competitive, and demanding. But it's also an industry where results matter more than assumptions, where quality work speaks louder than smooth presentations, where the foundations you build either hold up or they don't. Every day, I walk through job sites where deaf and hearing workers collaborate seamlessly, where innovative solutions emerge from diverse perspectives, where the company my father built has evolved into something he could never have imagined but would undoubtedly be proud of. Sometimes I think about that night 3 years ago when I first discovered Derek's gambling debts. When I made the decision to step into the shadows to save our father's legacy. I could never have predicted where that choice would lead, the heartbreak, the legal risks, the family confrontations, the professional recognition, the personal growth, the advocacy opportunities. But I don't regret any of it. Every forged signature, every sleepless night, every moment of invisible leadership was preparation for the visible leadership I embrace today. Every challenge that seemed insurmountable at the time became a stepping stone to greater strength and authenticity. If this story has resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family or workplace, if you've ever been underestimated because of who you are rather than what you can accomplish, I want you to know that your voice matters. Your perspective is needed. Your leadership has value. The world needs people who can see opportunities where others see limitations, who can build bridges across different communities and experiences, who can lead with both competence and compassion. Don't wait for permission to step forward. Don't wait for someone else to recognize your worth. The strongest foundations are built on truth, and the most lasting success comes from the courage to be authentically yourself, even when, especially when, that authenticity challenges other people's expectations. Your time in the shadows is preparation for your time in the light. When that moment comes, and it will come, step forward with confidence. The world is waiting for what only you can build. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing possibilities where others might see limitations. And thank you for reminding me that the most powerful voice is often the one that has been silent, gathering strength, waiting for exactly the right moment to speak its truth.